Put your hands on top of your head.
Well, I didn't.
Now!
Bet your mother had a loud bark.
Good morning. This is Morning Coffee with the Chief. I'm your host, Patrick Jordan, here on Pop Culture Minefield. You know, you can catch us every Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on both YouTube and Rumble. And if you're going to watch us, please do me a favor and make sure you become a subscriber on YouTube and you follow us on Rumble, like the show, make a comment, and share with a friend. You know, we've been growing our subscription here on YouTube. I think when I started, they were just shy of 7,000. We're now at 11,000 subscribers. So if you're a watcher and you watch the shows, you watch this show, you watch other shows, do me a favor, become a subscriber. That helps us with YouTube, and we can spread this content around. And this content on my show in particular, we talk about police work, both our own experiences, the movie that we review, and, you know, some of the stuff that's going on today, some of the political stuff. And, you know, I will tell you, I've since gotten another show. It's on KGRA's Rumble channel, and it's called Briefing with the Chief. And I go over politics, public policy, and the news. And so that's given me an outlet for my political viewpoints. So I do a little less on this show. I do a little more Hollywood and a little more experience in law enforcement, but you're going to still hear some politics on this show as well. And so I would encourage you to go to KGRA's Rumble channel on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And my audience is growing, so do me a favor, go over there. And if you do watch us, follow us on Rumble. And certainly look at iHeart or Speaker, www.speaker.com, where you can find the audio versions of my show. But you can go to kgradb.com and hit the shows and host tab, hit the Briefing with the Chief tab, and you can find all the audio versions of my show there as well. And you can find me on Twitter at LESD Jordan, and I comment there on a wide variety of issues. You know, I just saw an article today where they talked about UC Berkeley owns a piece of property, and on Saturdays they do a community garden. They don't let the white people toil in the community gardens. It's a person of colors day. Now, ever since I've been growing up, in the 62 years I've been on this earth, we've been told engagement and common efforts helps to break down those biases that people have towards one another, because you get to know all those commonalities of different people. And yet we're back to segregation. Doesn't make any sense. But I did comment on that at LESD Jordan on my Twitter handle. Now, on this show, I go out of my way to talk about one of my other endeavors, and that's the Los Angeles Mission. So go to the losangelesmission.org and make a donation. Now, they service the homeless on Skid Row. They serve over 400,000 meals a year. They provide more in-depth wraparound services for those folks who are ready to get off the street. So they meet their basic needs in addition to food and some basic clothing items. And if they want a place to sleep for the night, they'll give them a place to sleep and shower for the night. And when they're ready to get off the street, they provide 6 to 12 month wraparound services in a dormitory setting, and provide them with educational services, medical treatment, and of course, integration back into society, including job skills and job opportunities. It really is a great place. And they, of course, have a faith-based element to their instruction. And so they are in need of donations all the time. They do a great job. And do me a favor, go to the losangelesmission.org and make a donation today and help your fellow man. And, you know, one of the things that I will talk about that is exciting is George Gascon only got 25% of the vote recently in the DA's race in Los Angeles, and a guy named Nathan Hochman is going to run against him, and that's encouraging because he's got a chance of winning. But they're going to vilify him. They're going to call him a right winger. They're going to suggest all these bad things about him, just like they did with Judge O'Neill Burke in Chicago when she ran against the political machine's choice, the person that was going to replace Kim Fox out there. And so you guys got to pay attention to this stuff. Doesn't matter where you are in the country. If you got a Soros-funded DA, please pay attention to what's going on in the election and vote today. And if you're in LA County, make sure you register to vote and vote. Vote for Nathan Hochman as it comes up. I'm going to monitor that campaign. If you watch my other show, you'll hear me do updates. I do have Nathan Hochman coming on in a few weeks. And on that show, I also have, some folks who were in Libya and Benghazi when those folks attacked the mission there, killed the ambassador, and then attacked the CIA outpost there. I'm having some folks who are going to be on my show late May, and we're going to talk about a book they wrote. We're going to talk about their experiences. It's really relevant given what's going on in Israel and Gaza and what went on with ISIS in Russia. And, and we have some real threats here in the United States. So I'm going to bring on some experts when we talk about that. So it's a wide variety, a great show, and I would encourage you to join it. Now, on today's show, we're going to review the movie Gangster Squad, and I have some good friends that have come back to help me go over this movie, including the resident, not the resident expert, the global expert on the Gangster Squad for the LAPD and his friends. So we'll go by rank. We'll bring on Lieutenant John Baylis. He's been on before. He's a aficionado. He's a good friend of mine. He's a blue collar, tough, hard worker, but he does the research on the movies, which I really like when he's on my shows, because what I miss, he usually finds. Hey, John, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so our next guest is the global expert on the Gangster Squad in L.A. I would say resident expert, but he doesn't live here. They're both California refugees. They left the state. I am holding on here in California to try and shift it purple, I guess. I'm wearing the right shirt, right, to try and do that. But Sergeant Buz Williams in the Long Beach Police Department retired, and he is the grandson of one of the original members of the Gangster Squad and the son of another member of the Gangster Squad. And some of the people who are named in this movie, although this is clearly historical fiction, the Gangster Squad, he met, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But the movie, Buzz, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Pat.
Thanks for joining us again. I always have you on when they do this historical fiction with the Gangster Squad, whether it's, I think we've had you on for LA Confidential. We had you on for the Black Dahlia. I think there was another movie that we had you on for, but I knew I always wanted to do Gangster Squad and bring you on for this movie, right?
Right.
And, but this is clearly a historical fiction, right?
Well, absolutely. They use a lot of the real names, but any resemblance to what actually happened is purely coincidental.
Yeah.
I like the way you say that. Okay, so this movie, Gangster Squad, was released in 2013. It's an action thriller movie, and it was very entertaining. There was a lot of action involved, and I would think with all the shooting and stuff, I would have gotten out of the business of being a gangster, given how much everybody's dying in this movie. But it was directed by Ruben Fleischer, and it was written by William Beal, who is a former LAPD officer who worked robbery homicide. And yeah, that's probably where he got the names and the history from, but he's good at writing fiction, as we soon found out. But it stars Josh Brolin as the main character, and Ryan Gosling and Nick Nolte as Parker, who in my opinion, he didn't really resemble him. He's just a big name, but he looked like a drunk in this movie, old. And this would have been early in Parker's career, so he would have been younger, right? And Nolte looks like, hey, he's like at the end of his career, because I think, if I remember, Parker went into the 60s, right?
Oh, yeah, mid-60s after the Watts riot. And also, he didn't become chief until 1950, and this is supposed to take place in 49, so...
So that's where the historical fiction comes in. The big name, and that's, and they throw another name out there. I have another scene where they throw in Daryl Gates' name, another former chief of LAPD. But Emma Stone, this is the beautiful love interest of, and she is beautiful. And Anthony Mackie and Giovanni. John, you want to help me with that? Okay, thank you. And he plays Kennard, right? Is that he plays the wire guy, right?
Conwell Keeler.
Yeah.
He plays Conwell Keeler. Okay, and then we got Robert Patrick, Michael Pena, and Sean Penn as Mickey Cohen. And so actually, I thought this movie was actually quite entertaining. The fact that they say this is inspired by true events is really deceiving, and because it's even my cursory knowledge of the mafia and what was going on at the time, I knew that this was not correct. But you want to comment a little bit on that, Buzz?
Yeah, they started the Gangster Squad in 1946, late 45, early 46, and a guy, sergeant named Willie Burns, went down to 77th Street. They invited guys they thought were tough and honest down there, and he had a Tommy gun. He goes, "We're going to be using these. We're going to be going after these guys." But and they had Tommy guns, but they were and they had violin cases for them and everything, but they were a little too bulky, so but they rarely used them. And with all the shootings they had in the movie, that isn't the way they actually handled most of the gangsters. They, as an example, my dad, now my grandpa was one of the original, and he retired in 47, and my dad kind of took his place. And all of about half of the Jewish bookies in LA were my dad's snitches. And they were telling my dad, none of the bar owners complained, but they said there's a bunch of Detroit Purple gangs out here, and they're shaking bars for protection money. So he tells his captain, my dad tells his captain, and he sends two of the Gangster Squad cops to about a half dozen bars in Hollywood. And sure enough, where my dad and his partner, Jumbo Kennard, are, these two guys come in. They go up to the bartender, "We're here for the protection money." And bartender goes, "Protection from what?" One of the guys slaps him, reaches in the till and pulls out a $100 bill and says, "From that, and we'll be back next week for the same thing." My dad and Jumbo follow him out to the front, kick the crap out of them, throw them in the back of their car, and take them to either the train station or the airport, and tell them, a quote from my dad was, "Tell them we have a fucking police department out here, and if you guys come back, you're going to be going back right in a pine box." That was the way they handled it. I mean, they rarely pulled out their guns and got in shootouts with these guys.
Yeah, you wouldn't last very well. All right, so I guess I got to ask. So they did have access to Tommy guns. Did they carry the traditional 38s, or were they carrying something a little heavier?
I think my dad carried a 45 model
1911.
Yeah. So yeah, things were different then, and they have one of the things was bugging. Con Keeler in the movie was the bug guy, but in real life he was too. He made the bugs, and they planned. And people now go, "Well, didn't they have a search warrant?" Well, back then, for a wiretap to be legal, all you needed was the pre-written approval by the chief of police. So it was a different time, but
it was effective, right?
Oh yeah.
That's funny, because that is some form of an administrative process, having to get approval from the chief. But obviously, I could see where that could get abused. So, John, hey, before we get the movie rolling, there was a lot of locales in Southern California that were featured in the show. that did actually exist. So there was some. When I say historical fiction, there was an effort to bring some realism to. Like Slapsy Maxie, that
Yep.
was a club. Did you do any research on who
Oh yeah. Well,
who was the
Slapsy
guy?
Max was actually owned originally, and well, the mob, but also under the name of Maxie Rosenblum, who
Oh,
was a professional fighter and became an actor later. And that was an actual bar and nightclub that they used. It eventually got torn down. It was the Wilshire Bowl took over there, and then that's been gone for years. But yeah, Slapsy Maxie's was real. There's a Club Figaro that they go into, which was on Melrose in West Hollywood's area. And then you had, before this started, I told you about Highland Park Station as where they worked out of. I misspoke. When in the movie, when the black guy gets arrested, the black officer, and by either Burbank or
Yeah, Burbank. Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's actually, that building was LAPD Highland Park Division. It's still there, that they used for the setting. And then there's the Garden of Allah that they used for their tryst with Ryan Gosling and his girlfriend Emma Stone. That was a place that all the actors and politicians, anybody wanted to have a little tryst, that's where they went. That eventually was torn down later for a high rise. But during that time, that was big. It's just like the Comedy Store used to be. I kind of can't think of the name of it now. Had a brain fart. But a lot of those locations were real.
Yeah, you can still go see some old Hollywood. You remember the old, what's it, the Argyle building? I think they call it the Sunset Inn now. It was the abandoned building on Sunset. They redid. It's all Art Deco.
Yep.
And actors used to live there as apartment building. I mean, I took one of my sisters came to town. And I said, "Hey, we're gonna go see some old Hollywood." And I took her to lunch at the pool. There's a pool deck that there you can get some lunch at the bar there. So there's a lot of interesting and cool places still in LA, and certainly you can see Union Station, which is kind of an Art Deco throwback to that era in LA. They always, whenever they do one of these movies, they always seem to do some shooting at Union Station because it just fits the theme of the time, right? Even City Hall and is kind of like that, right? City Hall has that kind of look. So so it's I wouldn't say, I can't remember when the Hall of Justice was built, if it was back in that time, but a lot of old buildings
the Hall of Justice was built in the 1920s.
So it would have been around at the time too. And when you go into it, you actually see it. I mean, my last office was on the 7th floor there, so as the chief. But and I love the old history of those buildings. It's really cool, and we ignore it. And so when I see some of these movies, whether it's this movie or Mulholland Falls or L.A. Confidential, where they're talking about these locations, they bring out the cars, which are really cool.
Oh yeah.
And then they talk about the historical reference that went on L.A. It does make it very interesting, although it's kind of loose. On the historical reference. Yeah, right, Buzz. I mean, you lived it with your mom, your dad, and your grandpa, but it is interesting how they blend history with this fictional shoot 'em up.
They, as far as the setting and everything, they did a great job. As a matter of fact, an interesting side note is they built for the movie Slapsy Maxie's. I think they built it in Downey. They redid a building and made it look just like Slapsy Maxie's. So. And the train station, Con Keeler told me when they first got started, they worked out of the chief's office. They worked for the chief, and the chief would have them do special things. They were having a rash of people of the service. They would get released and get their pay, and they would be at the train station waiting for a train, and they'd have to wait 12, 15 hours sometimes. Well, they had a group of guys who were going, and if a guy was asleep or wasn't paying attention, they'd take his suitcase and run away with it. And the guy had his departing pay with him, so they made money. Well, they heard that, the chief heard it, and had the Gangster Squad stop that. Con Keeler was at the time they had a reserve fish and game, and he was a reserve fish and game officer, and he heard that they'd out in Lancaster they had captured a bobcat that was harassing some of the people out there. They got it. Went to the Salvation Army and got an old suitcase. Went out to Lancaster, got this bobcat, put it in the suitcase, and then they had one of their guys stumbling like he's half drunk and in front of the train station with a bag and falling asleep. And these 4 guys in a 4-door sedan pull up, and the guy in the back seat says they go about 30 yards. All of a sudden, there's a panic 4-wheel skid, and 4 guys bail out. And about 30 seconds later, this pissed off bobcat jumps out and's looking around, walks away. So
now that is crime
That's
prevention at its best, right? I guess we
Yes.
don't get to do that anymore because the activists PETA would be all over us, and all the social justice warriors would be all over us.
yeah.
But it was acceptable in the 40s, right? So good
yeah.
for them.
That was inventive. I love it.
And was innovative,
It was innovative. Yes, that's funny. So anyway, let's roll the first scene in this. I call this Mickey Cohen, and let's get into a little of this, Buzz. So Mickey Cohen was around at the time, and the Gangster Squad was developed to help harass, because some of these scams were really organized crime doing this stuff, right? So
right.
and Mickey got his cut, right? And so so in this case, they show. They showed Sean Penn boxing, and he was a former boxer, right? Mickey Cohen, he used to box.
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of shape he was in at the time. I don't get the sense he was all that big, but
No.
he did exist as a character. He had a relationship with other Jewish gangsters. He was a Jewish gangster, and with Bugsy Siegel.
Yeah, he worked for Siegel.
Say it again.
He worked for Siegel,
Yeah,
and then kind of took over LA after Siegel was offed.
Or he tried to, right? And this created conflict, right? So he did exist, and he was one of the, I don't want to say the target of the Gangster Squad, but he was one of the efforts that they focused on, because he's locally grown. So he wasn't like a mobster that came, well, actually he probably did come from somewhere, but he was here for a while, right? He hung in here, and he resisted the LAPD and everybody else to try to build an empire. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. I think he was born in Brooklyn, but his mother brought him out here, and he worked selling papers and stuff as a kid. And then he got into boxing, and I think he was in Cleveland and Chicago working for the Al Capone mob for a while. So before he came back out here.
Yep.
And he was a boxer, but I don't think he was a great boxer. He was a lightweight or featherweight, because he was only
a welterweight. Welterweight.
He was only about 5'6", I think.
Pounds.
It's only 5'6".
Yeah.
Yeah.
John, anything to add, John?
Huh?
Anything to add, John?
Yeah, he was 146 pounds. That's a welterweight. But he, in the movie, he mentions, "Oh, nobody's going to take my title." He never had a title.
Yeah.
He maybe as an amateur winning a Golden Gloves tournament, who knows? But he never had a title.
No.
And he was a welterweight. He was a little man. He was short, and then of course he got bigger and squattier as he enjoyed life.
Yeah.
So he did exist, and he's played by, and I'm not a huge fan of Sean Penn, but I think he played a pretty good bad guy in this show, right? I mean, he killed a lot of folks, and but it was, so it was a pretty good role by and Sean Penn, John, right? He's just entertaining.
Excellent actor. I can't stand the guy for his politics, but he's an excellent actor. If you ever saw when he did My Name is Sam, and he played a mentally challenged youngster, what a performance. But he was great in this. He always plays a good role.
Yeah.
He did a good job acting, but that wasn't the way Mickey Cohen was, the way they show him in here. I mean,
okay, but did your grandfather or your dad have interactions with Mickey Cohen himself, and what would be their description of him?
Oh yeah, he had a lot of interaction with him, and he'd go to Slapsy Maxie's because that's where a lot of the hoodlums were. to gather intelligence. He knew when Mickey got arrested, he was the one who would take him to the state officers who would take him to state prison. And when he'd get out, they'd meet him at the airport or the train station, my dad and his partner. In fact, the last time my dad had retired and the new intelligence officers who met him, he goes, "Hey, where's Williams and Roberts?" My dad and his partner, because he always expected him there. But he wasn't, I mean, you see him that first scene where they're ripping the guy apart and, I mean, you hate him from the minute you see him. And he was actually quite an affable fellow if you saw him at Slapsy Maxie's or at his florist shop or his when he had a paint store, you'd kind of like the guy, and he had a sense of humor. I remember as a kid he was being interviewed by I don't know if it was a congressional or if it was congressional investigating committee or whatever, but they asked him, "Mr. Cohen, have you ever done an honest day's work in your life?" And his answer was, "I refuse to answer. Might incriminate me."
Well, there are some crazy gangsters,
oh yeah,
like the Capone Squad had some, I think, crazy, Mad, I forget his name now, but that would have, because I think they do take these stories from other gangsters and they apply them on somebody. Because I had never heard that story. I heard that he was tough. I heard that him and Dragna had a fight, which we'll get into. I mean, the struggle to control L.A. But when you start tearing bodies apart, that gets up in the LA Times or the newspapers, and suddenly the politicians get even more focused on that stuff. So there was this balance where the gangsters used violence to control, but they tried not to do it. This is just my impression. You can correct me if I'm wrong. They didn't want to go too far because they didn't want too much attention.
Exactly. No, that's right. There weren't a lot of shootings. I think Cohen murdered a guy. I think he had a laundry mat or something. He and his mother, they were making book, and Mickey wanted to take over their book, and he went in there and shot and killed this guy. Got off on, said it was self-defense because the guy supposedly had a .45. And then there was another shooting like that. I don't know if he or one of his henchmen killed the guy, but there wasn't a whole lot of it wasn't like every week there were bodies strewn by Cohen and his men or the Dragnas for that matter.
So there was book in LA like they talk about in New York all the time, and so it did exist at the time. And so I guess we probably, and the other thing they talk about is all the soldiers coming back, the opportunity. So when World War II ended, all these guys are loaded with money, they're coming back, and that's when you saw the explosion of housing in LA, right? San Fernando Valley began to explode, other areas, the San Gabriel Valley. So there was a lot of money to be made, and the gangsters are trying to line up to make their own. It kind of a la the, stealing the soldiers' money at Union Station. They're just out hustling, trying to make as much as they can. Yeah, including and then of course, I guess we should talk about John. So Bugsy Siegel got killed, and Mickey Cohen flowed in to try and take over at least his rackets that existed in LA. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
he was a bag man. The wire that they used for gambling, where they knew who was going to win what ahead of time, and then you do all the betting and all the bookies. He had all that and the prostitution.
And I would have thought if he had a job, because his job was the bodyguard for Siegel. I would have thought if you failed, you wouldn't have been number one to move up to replace him, right? Because Siegel got killed, right? Or unless he was in on the murder, right? And
could be,
could
be right.
And,
but these guys, they encouraged them to go back to where they came from, and there was a scene in this movie, if I remember correctly, where they shot the guys in the legs, but then they pushed them down a hill, which was a la Mulholland Falls. Do you remember that scene, Buzz? Yeah. And so they there obviously there's truth to Mulholland, where they push them over the hills, or in Hollywood, or wherever they're at, to encourage them to leave and go back to Chicago or New York where they came from.
Right.
And so that is accurate. And of course we have was there because one of the things you get out of O'Mara, so we'll get into these guys, the coppers themselves, but Josh Brolin's character, they're talking about the corruption in the city, and Josh Brolin, he makes a comment, or there is a comment made: "Good men do nothing." That's he just doesn't believe that. These guys, this was just business for these guys, the Gangster Squad, or was there almost a religious drive to do this? What do you think, Buzz?
I think they were all pretty dedicated and honest guys. Now, the one guy in there, Wooters, Gerry Wooters.
Yeah.
Con was telling me that he never liked him, thought he was a crook, and he was involved. I think he was telling him, hey, we could make a lot of money doing this. And they finally kicked him out of the Gangster Squad. So they were dedicated to what they wanted to do. And they you know, I mean, they use other innovative means too. They heard that Dragna and one of the other big Italian guys, they had this warehouse or storage area, and they saw Tommy gun in there one time. So Con goes in there, and these two guys were friends, but they were kind of competitors too, mobsters. And so Con picks a lock, gets in there, and steals the Tommy gun. So these two guys, they go in and, hey, where's the Tommy gun? I don't have it. Well, I don't have it. and these guys are almost getting in a war because they think the other guy got it, so he could take him out, you know. So they did that, but their main deal was they wanted to keep major organized crime out of California, out of Southern California.
Well, let's talk about the characters, particularly those that they do exist in real life. So Josh Brolin's character, O'Mara, he did exist, right?
Yeah. Oh, Jack O'Mara. Yeah, was one of the original guys in there. Was a sergeant, and was a World War II veteran. But I think he worked like Army Air Corps and something like that. But and then my grandpa. Benny Williams. He was in the Gangster Detail in 1932.
Oh wow!
And I have this picture of it. I don't know if you can.
Let's show it. Yeah, if you can.
This is my grandfather right there.
He's in the corner. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
And
that's cool. They got their hats on. The Hat Squad.
Yeah. And they it says a 32 Gangster Detail, but in the administrative division, it's 1932. My dad said they called it the Pro High unit because they worked prohibition, and they put my grandpa Williams on there because he didn't drink and he was honest. And one of the other guys in there, let me see, this guy right here, Whitey Ravenscroft. Before he got on this squad, he was a heavyweight boxing champion in the Navy. And after he left LA, he went up to San Francisco and was a bookie up in San Francisco. Then came back down and was a bookie down in Southern California and was one of my dad's snitches. And he'd come over to my house. I used to call him Uncle Whitey. He'd come over to the house, and my dad finally got a lock on his liquor cabinet because Whitey was kind of a drunk and would come and
drink them dry, huh?
Yeah, but in '46 when they started that, my grandfather, they brought him in, and he had been, I guess, a professional football player in Indiana before he came out here, before they had the NFL, and was I guess my grandmother, I never did see it, but had a letter from George Hallis wanting my grandfather to try out. But they would get these guys together, all together, and they'd go out and try and see what the gangsters were doing, and shake them down for guns, and anybody, especially anybody from out of town, they really
they focus
didn't open the welcome wagon for them.
So they did use the Kennard. They used his name, although he was, or no, he was featured. He was featured as one of these guys, right?
He was the guy who had the big long 38 and shot the cans out of. And, and they have him
the cowboy.
They have him listed as Max Kennard. His real name was Doug Kennard, but everybody called him Jumbo because he was, I think, the biggest guy.
Well, we lost Buzz there a little bit. Buzz, you froze up, so you might want to log out and come back in again, and because you are definitely frozen there. So, all right, John. So, let's roll the next scene, loose ends, because we're going to get into the. This is where we got Slapsy Maxie coming in, and some of these other places that they use. And, one of the things I noticed is, even in my time working Hollywood, is the connection between the clubs and the gangsters. So they would party all the time, and they had connections with the clubs that were going on. Even in our time, there was some connections between organized crimes, even if it was just that that's where they preferred to play. And if they were pulling scams, it was usually in some kind of nightclub. And this is where they have Slapsy Maxies. And what I really liked about this, and I know you could appreciate this, is all the neon lights that they use. I mean, they're great for the movie, but they did exist, right? They used a lot of neon back in the 30s and 40s. I think it's a precious gas, right? But that's, I remember when we worked Universal, if you go up to Universal City Walk, they have a bunch of signs from the Museum of Neon Art that were some of these traditional signs, and you saw that in this movie, right?
Oh, absolutely. Earlier I mentioned the Comedy Store. That was Ciro's, CIRO, apostrophe S. That was a big hangout for cops, actors, and the mob until 1952 or 56. But that was Ciro's. That was a big one. Slapsy Maxie's was a big one. There were a lot of places that they went. In fact, there's one that's still there on Hollywood or Sunset in LAPD's area. Something I can't think of the name. It's an Italian place that all the mobsters and the cops went to, and also in our area, Formosa Cafe.
Yeah,
those were always spots that they used.
And we saw that. We saw that Formosa Cafe and Cafe LA Confidential and
City Confidential, yeah.
Yeah, and what I like is they do have tours. If you're coming from out, they have tours that show old Hollywood, where they'll take you to a lot of those old places where people used to hang out, right? And which make it so it's kind of an interesting tour. I mean, I still live here. You guys have lived here, so. And when you see these movies, you kind of want to go back and visit some of these locations. And the other thing is, I think they dress very stylish. Although maybe it's just because I grew up watching these gangster movies, and everybody's wearing a suit. That is so foreign to me because I wear a suit when I go to church, I go to a wedding. Obviously, when I was an executive, I had to wear a suit. But wearing a suit every day is just.
Well, it's like the fedora. Everybody wore a hat. Everybody had a fedora. Everybody, when they went to Ciro's or Slapsy Maxie's, everybody was dressed to the nines. And still, if you look at some of the other Italian movies that Scorsese's done, they're always dressed pretty lavish with ties and suits and everything else. And that's usually what you get in some of the mob-owned places. But it was really big back then.
So, Buzz, so the suits and ties, was that the uniform of the day for our for the Gangster Squad, the guys that did actually work?
Yeah, unless they were planting a bug or something, then wear coveralls and stuff like that. In fact, Mickey Cohen's house blew up one time. and they had a bug in his house, and what happened was it went out. So they're waiting at night for him to go to bed, and they're waiting, and all of a sudden there's a big explosion, and apparently what happened was one of the other mobs, one of the Italian mobsters, I understand, went under there and planted a bomb under what they thought was his bedroom. And it was a bedroom in the house, but it was a bedroom where Mickey kept all his suits, because he had like 200 suits. And he was in the other bedroom, so he wasn't hurt. But while they're waiting to go check on their bug, the house explodes.
And that was probably his work. Well, one of the things they show in this particular scene is they talk about, and they show it here with the guy Jack Whalen, who actually did exist, and Ryan Gosling's character is sitting down talking to him. Is that Cohen was on the warpath, and so you tell the story about him shooting the bookie, trying to take over his book, and other stuff. So that did exist after Bugsy Siegel, who was probably New York's guy here, was killed. There was a struggle to actually have control, right? And that's what they're kind of portraying in the movie.
Kind of. And there was kind of a, they had their own areas. Like the Jewish bookies had some areas, and the Italians had others, and they may try and encroach on it, but pretty much it was an untruce that they had. So I don't know, Nick Licata and the Italians would do some things, but they really never were at war. And as a matter of fact, Kahn told me in the late 50s they started noticing that they brought in a bunch of Mickey Cohen and a bunch of other guys. I think Johnny Roselli was one of them, but I'm not sure. But they started noticing to ask Mickey a question, and he'd look at the Italian. So they came to the conclusion that they were kind of working for the Italians then. They were working together. So
yeah, in LA, the Lucchese crime family is the one that ran the Italians on that side. Jack Dragna was their point man, and Johnny Stompanato from Lana Turner fame was his second in charge to Jack Dragna. In the movie, he and Cohen get into it, talking shit, and then of course they go and kill Dragna.
Never
false. Purely false. Dragna, he actually wanted to get out of the mob after a while because his wife had passed away from cancer, and he just didn't want to do it anymore. And he died himself in 1956 of a heart attack.
Yeah, and his son Louis Tom Dragna kind of took over for him after that.
Oh, he did. Okay. Yeah. Well, they do show a scene in here in which Jack Whalen, a real person, a real gangster, I guess, and one of our Gangster Squad are talking, and they kind of use it as an opportunity to indicate that the judge is at a table with Mickey Cohen, the chief of police for Burbank is there, but also Eugene Biscaluse was there, right? Former sheriff of LA County, suggesting that he was corrupt. Okay, Buzz, you got the inside scoop, do you? It was Eugene Biscaluse corrupted by these guys, or was he?
I never heard that. I understand that Biscaluse was a little shaky on things. He was owned by the mob or anything like that. I never got that impression. But they, that's what they try to do, is get in on law enforcement. And in fact, I don't know, there was a book out by a guy named Mike Miller, who I know, who lives in Prescott, who retired from LAPD organized crime. And he wrote this book. It was about their secret files and stuff like that. And I know him, and we've talked about it. And he says, LAPD had all kinds of files on judges and politicians and stuff like that. And my dad told me, he says, we had those, but he says, we weren't trying to get information on politicians and judges and stuff like that. But he says we'd be staking out a bust out crap game or a cat house, one of the mob cat houses. and they'd see this car roll up, so they'd run the plate. They'd find out, isn't that Judge so and so? Yeah. So they'd open a file on him because
Right.
if he's gambling or if he's prostituting around, they wanted to find out, how he was sentencing people or why this politician wanted this particular legislation passed. And so, yeah, they had that stuff. That's what they tried to do, was get in, and they owned a lot of judges. Mickey Cohen owned some judges for sure. And I'm sure
both sides own judges. But the part in this, what I don't like is where they have supposedly the sheriff and the Burbank. Now, Burbank, if you look at their history, that was a crooked town back in those days.
Sure.
But so was parts of LAPD.
Sure.
And probably the sheriff too.
Yeah.
But where Mickey Cohen beats up Eugene Biscaluz, number one, they got a guy that's 6'5" playing Biscaluz. And number two, Biscaluz was as short as Mickey Cohen. He's maybe 5'8", and that never happened. And I'll tell you why it never happened. My evidence is two things. Number one, the Italians and some of the other people had boats offshore that were outside of our vicinity that they had gambling boats on.
Yeah.
And LAPD, as well as sheriffs, boarded those boats and ended up throwing in the slot machines and the board tables in the ocean.
Yeah.
Because we went out, we didn't put up with that bullshit.
Yeah.
That's both LAPD and us.
Yeah.
So if Biscaluz was bought off, why would he be doing that?
Yeah.
Bullshit.
I never heard that. In fact, what I heard was Biscaluz was the sheriff's version of Parker, probably not as famous for it, but that he professionalized the sheriff's department and brought it into a new age. Similar strategies, probably inspired a little bit by Parker and LAPD.
Yeah.
I mean, because I think the Arrow Wing and there's just a lot of progress in law enforcement occurred, not only under Parker but also under Biscaluz, who went into the 60s. He kind of if I had to, he kind of mirrored Parker's career in terms of duration and time period, right, Buzz?
Yeah. And the only thing negative I heard about Biscaluz was that he gave a lot of gun permits, and some of them he didn't check out too much. That was the only bad thing I heard about him.
It's the way it should be.
Better. Well, and here's the thing. I mean, if people make donations to your campaign, that was part of it. I mean, he had the whole reserve posse and a lot of that stuff. And but sheriffs all around the country do that, and they need to be doing a little more vetting on that stuff. I think we got better at that stuff.
Sure.
But I never really heard that he was corrupt, and then he was replaced by Pitches, an FBI guy who has his own drama. But for the most part, these guys, they straight shooters is what I heard. But because what's the reason to lie if they weren't, right?
Exactly.
At this point in time, really. That's one of my. I've been writing columns for the Courier, and then I read it for the Prescott E-News now. And when I was writing for the Long Beach Police Officers Association rap sheet, one of my columns in each that the chiefs of police nowadays should be elected like the sheriff, so they answer to the people and not the politicians. Because God, I mean, and all these, all the defund the police and Black Lives Matters riots, you had all these police chiefs, including the chief of Long Beach, who is now the sheriff of LA County. They just stood there and let these people go up and tear the city apart, tear a restaurant
by cowardice.
Yeah.
So we're going to get in a little politics here. Yeah, I argue on my other show, Briefing with the Chief, that it's important to have an elected sheriff because they could be independent of these politicians and speak the truth when it needs to be spoken to.
Yes.
Of course, I do expect them to be a little more tactful. A little, I think our last sheriff did more harm than good because he just there's a way to do it and a way to not to do it. But he wasn't wrong in a lot of the stuff he took. Hey, let's bring up Cam's last comment, because I do want to talk a little about it. Is Chief Jordan? I got a hot, but I love your show. Your guests are always so knowledgeable, and the movies are great ones. Thanks, gentlemen. Yeah, so thank you so much, Cam. That is, when we do these ones where we talk about the Gangster Squad, I love bringing Buz on and John on, because John does his research, and Buz lived it, right? That was part of your family, and so it makes for interesting commentary on the movies. But thank you, Cam. So, hey, let's get into so we were talking about the leader. So Burbank was corrupt at the time, right? Or that we do have these pockets of corruption. So it's not unusual for having a small department that's bought off. You saw that in Illinois with when they left Chicago, they went to Cicero, Illinois, right? And Capone bought off that town, basically controlled it. So this is not an unusual thing. These things do happen. But it's also why it makes, and I'll let you comment on this, Buz, because I think it's important. That's why guys like Parker and Biscaloos, and then the guys on the ground like the Gangster Squads are so important because they're using the system and money to do ill-gotten gain, but they need men who have honor and dignity, and they're willing to take some risk, and they're willing to try and do the right thing. I mean, Parker probably looked at all these soldiers coming, these families coming out, and his clients are them, and his clients are the businesses trying to operate legitimately. And so this could grow as a healthy country. We don't want to be New York, right? We want to be something other than that, right?
Yeah. Well, Parker, when he got in, actually the Gangster Squad was started 5 years before Parker, 4 or 5 years before Parker got in, and he wanted to disband the Gangster Squad. He later changed the name to Intelligence, but the captain talked to him, and he liked the captain, and so he kept him. But he wanted to get rid of him. He didn't see a need for him. Thought they were unbridled, but they worked out of the chief's office. Yeah, so he did what he wanted them to do. So.
Well, let's bring up the next scene. I call this scene Daryl Gates, just because he's featured in this as the driver for Chief Parker, and he ultimately becomes chief of police himself, either famous or infamous, however you wish to see Daryl Gates. I thought he was he was the classic old school chief, which didn't really fly in the 90s, but I think he was an honorable guy that was tarred and feathered, so to speak, reputation-wise. But he's in this, and they start putting their team together. And we've already talked about a lot of the team members, but he's featured in this, Daryl Gates, right? And what do you think, Buz? Did your dad and those guys have interactions with Daryl? Is this just complete fiction and they want to use his name?
No, he actually was the chief's driver. So that part is true. And in fact, he later got into intelligence as a lieutenant. And when he got in there, he really didn't know a whole lot. He called my dad in. My dad at the time was working the card clubs in Gardena because the mob from back east were trying to get an inroad in there. And he's a new lieutenant, been there about a month, and he calls him in and says, I wanted to talk to you before I wrote up this 181, which I guess is a disciplinary form on LAPD. And he says, well, what for? He says, well, you're spending like 60-70% of your time in Gardena outside the city. So then he explains to him, what happens in Gardena, if the mob takes over in Gardena, is going to affect LA. And to Gates's credit, he appreciated, said, thanked him. And he was at my dad's retirement when my dad retired. I got a picture of my dad and Daryl Gates shaking hands when he's handing him his retirement badge. So, yeah, my dad liked Daryl Gates a lot. But and the other thing, see, back then, Parker and the chiefs of police, like in LA, had civil service protection.
Yeah.
And that's when everything turned to crap, was when they took the civil service protection around there, because then they couldn't say what needed to be said. They had to say what the politicians wanted them to say.
Or they had to bend the knee when the protests come, right? So, which is what we saw here. Well, I think I wanted to bring up because Gates was the last chief to have civil service protection.
Yeah.
And they removed it after the Rodney King riots, and not the best day for LAPD, because I think they were caught flat-footed when that happened.
Yeah.
But he somebody that we had a comment was Gerald Gates a street cop. I don't know, but I will say, to be honest, having made it to division chief, half my career was administration, the other half was doing police work. So there's that's why he calls the guy in and says, hey, you're spending 60% of your time in Gardena. That's what managers and administrators end up doing. They got to ask the questions, because there's a point in time as you go up, you might understand the streets, but you just don't understand the dynamics of the day. Is that right? Is that fair? John, is that a fair comment?
Yeah. Gates did work patrol. He came up just like you and I, but then he went all the way. But he's a little bit of both. But no, you're absolutely right. And you're talking about civil service protection. Look what happened with Alex, who was our last sheriff.
Yeah.
The county supervisors voted to get rid of him being elected.
Yeah.
And made him an at-will employee. Now, nobody's challenged it yet, but I expect one of these times we're going to get a real sheriff in there that's going to challenge it, because it's a violation of our voting rights.
Yeah.
Isn't it a violation of the state constitution? So you say he's at will.
But they're doing it under the guise of the county charter.
Yeah.
And so they did that. And that's as far as I'm concerned, it's illegal.
Oh, I didn't know they did that.
I'm not a lawyer.
I didn't know they did that.
They're suggesting because he's at will, if he violates something, they can get rid of him at any time. They're setting up. My one frustration. I don't know if you know Luna Buzz, but my one frustration with him right now is I don't think he's really understands the power of the office, and he's not fighting back as a sheriff. Because there's a separation of powers. You have the executive, you have the legislative, and you have judiciary, right?
Yeah.
And so the legislative, who are also quasi-executives, the board, I mean, they have great amount of executive authority as well, are using their power to undermine the power of the executive. And so the separation of powers is separating here. That's why. So when people say, well, I don't like the sheriff, I don't like that sheriff, or it isn't about the sheriff, it's about the office.
Absolutely.
And they're weakening the office of the sheriff so that so nobody will stop them from their crazy policies and what they're trying to do. And what do you think about that, Buzz? Am I onto something there?
You are absolutely right. And I know Bob Luna real well. We were both sergeants together in the gangs, in the gang enforcement section in the 90s. And I consider him a friend. Nicest guy. He would help you out doing anything. I never had to work for him. People who worked for him said his problem was he couldn't make a decision. It'd take him 6 months to make a decision. It should have taken 5 minutes.
We all know chiefs like that.
Yeah.
Well, but I wasn't one of those guys.
Oh, I know that. No.
Yeah. Don't look at Pat when you say that, John.
Yeah, I wasn't one of those guys.
No, I know that. I'm not.
But yeah, that's and he was close with our mayor, who was a Democrat and now is a congressman. But this was after I left, and like I said, I personally like him. I never had to work for him, but people I know who work for him just didn't like working for him.
All right. Well, I wanted to get into who Jack Dragna is, but I think we're running up on our commercial break here, and I think I might want to do that commercial break now and then pick up with Dragna right after this. Martine, are we ready to roll our mid-show break here?
Yes, we are. So, gentlemen, you have 2 minutes.
Oh, we got 2 minutes? Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Hey, did I click off for a while, Pat?
You did. You did.
I'm sitting here and all of a sudden my screen goes blank, and so I went in and reinstituted it.
So Martina, we rolling the commercial.
There's only one location on the internet where you can get it all: movie, TV, and comic industry. News and rumor analysis, official scoops from Geekosity magazine, reviews, and interviews. So, when you need it to be Sunday, there's only one place to go, mate. Pop Culture Minefield, where they're always talking nerd stuff. Right, jog on then.
Meet the Seattle Vigilante. Like so many comic heroes, this warrior hides his identity. But his identity isn't the only secret he has to keep. After grievous wounds received during combat, Tier 1 operator John Russell begins to recover and comes to terms with his new reality of being an amputee. And as he learns how to use his new prosthetic limb, he finds himself caught up in the bureaucratic red tape that too many wounded veterans experience, the exhausting medboard process. Out of sheer frustration, John takes it out on the criminal scum of the city. But when reality kicks in, John realizes he started something that's having an impact on the greater world around him, and thus has to reevaluate his motives. And moreover, just how far is John willing to go to finish this war he's declared against the criminals in Seattle? And will he even survive? From the creator of IDW's award-winning graphic novel Code Word Geronimo comes a new story about a different kind of warrior, Vindicated Inc., the first of its kind disabled veteran action hero comic. The Vindicated Inc. graphic novel crowdfunding campaign on fundmycomic.com is provided in the description of this video. We hope you become a contributor. Please share this link. Thank you.
Well, welcome back to Morning Coffee with the Chief. We are going over the movie Gangster Squad with Gangster Squad historian Buz Williams and my friend and movie aficionado Lieutenant John Baylis. Hey, welcome back, guys. And you can catch the show every Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on YouTube or Rumble. Remember to become a subscriber or a follower, depending on what platform you're on. Like the show, share it with a friend. Hey, so let's. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is Jack Dragna. So he's represented in this movie pretty well, right? And he was the Italian guy who was in charge in L.A. We talked a little bit about him. And did your dad or your grandfather have interactions with Jack Dragna and his book? I'm sure they did. And what do you have any stories regarding that?
Well, yeah, they had him bugged. They had him bugged. He had a girlfriend, and he had an apartment that he rented for her, and they had that bugged because he was doing some business out of there. And I guess he is how can I say this? Orally copulating his girlfriend. They're hearing this on the deal, and out that they had a tape of that, and he was afraid because if the mobsters found out he was doing that to a woman, but they'd consider that perversion, and they would have gone after him. So that's some of the stuff they had. And they had and they had Mickey Cohen's flower shop bugged. And an interesting story about that is Billy Graham comes into his flower shop one time, and he's in the back talking to his guys because that's where he conducted his book, was in the back. So they had that bugged, and he they say, hey, a guy wants to talk to you out front, some religious guy, and it was Billy Graham, and they don't know what Billy Graham and he discussed, but when he comes back, they said, what did he want? What did he want, Mickey? He said he was wanted for all his revivals. He wanted me to provide flowers if he could convert me to Christianity. And they said, well, what did you tell him, Mickey? He says, I told him, hey, I was born a Jew. I'll die a fucking Jew. That was what they had on tape. So, and I mean, I think Billy Graham was an honest guy, but I think, he was trying to convert the dirty, stinking heathen.
No, Monkey, it's not superstar Billy Graham who is the wrestler, right? It is Billy Graham, the actual preacher. Yeah, he was, and that's funny. It had the religious figure managed to convert Cohen. That would have been a big.
It would have been.
Would have been a big political coup for him, and so he understood marketing, I guess, right? Billy Graham. Sure. And so Cohen had a flower shop. That's interesting because Dion O'Banion and I
was just going to say that.
The mobster, the Irish mobster in Chicago had a flower shop, and when he was gunned down. Very interesting. And the other part of this is, so I guess it would have been unmanly for him to do those unnatural things with his girlfriend at the time. But these guys all pretended like they were religious, as you saw in The Godfather too. And okay, if you're running around killing people and stealing their money, you kind of, it seems like you lost 5 of those 10 commandments, right? That you didn't hear, right? So,
but really... John will tell you, as a good Catholic, as long as you go to confession on Saturday, night, you can get communion on Sunday.
You got a problem with that?
No.
Hey, funny
I'll make a deal you can't refuse.
Exactly.
I'll make a donation, make a confession. You just absolve me, right?
Hey, 12 years of Catholic school, you got to learn something,
I was at Pat's house one year, and his brother, the priest, is there.
My uncle.
Your uncle, and we're talking about giving confession. Not confession, but the communion. When you go get communion, they give you the little wafer, and people are always going. And now, I would always do this, and the priest, he goes, "Oh yeah, it's so gross. Put your hands out, damn it! I don't want to stick that in your mouth."
But that's what we were taught to do, the whole tongue thing when you're.
I know, but
schools, right?
That priest was telling me that. He says it's so gross. Oh, you don't know if they'll brush their teeth. Oh my god, I was roaring.
So my uncle is one of my fans, so he listens to the show. So I'll hear comments if there is comments about, but he watches both of my shows, and I get comments from him and his buddy. But that's interesting. Let's show the scene Cohen versus Dragna, because there was a struggle between these two guys, right? And there's always tension, right? And the Chicago outfit had struggles between the Irish gangs and Italians for a long time before it seems like the Italians won out. But you saw that in New York as well. The Irish were kind of in charge. More Italians came, and the Italians kind of took over. And then, of course, you had the Jewish gangsters partnered with the Italians early on. I mean, you have Louis
Meyer Lansky.
I mean, Murder Incorporated included a lot of Jewish mobsters. As you talked about, Buzz, early in the show, the Purple Gang were Jewish mobsters out of Detroit, right? So these mobsters, and they interacted when it was in their best interest, and they fought each other when it was not, or when they felt like they were getting a little bit like today, disrespected with the gangsters, right? Or that they were getting ripped off. A lot of it was more about money than anything else, but there was a respect too. And you could see that there's a lack of respect in the movie from Cohen towards the Italians, which I don't think would have flew, because I think the Italians were pretty strong, but that's what they show in the movie. Do you want to build on that?
Well, there was a symbiosis, I guess, between the two. I mean, like you said, Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky and um, and the Jewish mobsters. You know, the syndicate, the big organization in New York, they work together. They, you know, I mean, there were problems, but if you could solve a problem without putting somebody down, they'd do it. But some people just wouldn't listen, like Legs Diamond and some of those guys back in New York. So they would get the okay, and Murder Incorporated would send one of their guys out to kill him. And who was it? Louis
Lepke.
Coulter was
Yeah.
one of the.
And Louis Balcoulter, he was one of the gunmen.
Yeah, and
Lepke,
he was
Balcoulter,
they sent him to the chair.
Yeah.
And I guess at sentencing, the judge said, "Yeah, you know, do you have any last words?" And he said something. He says, "Yeah, when they put me in the chair, will you hold my hand?"
I did not hear that.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Well, but a lot of the gangs, I don't want to say LA was an open town, but it was.
It was.
Okay, so it was
Yeah,
an open town.
I mean, it wasn't. It was open, so you had mobsters coming out from Cleveland, coming out from Detroit, coming out from Chicago.
Kansas City.
Kansas City was a big one, yeah. And I mean, and Las Vegas, the same thing. You know, I mean, Kansas City took a lot of the skim from Las Vegas, as did Chicago. So, yeah, and it was Jewish and Italian, you know, and as long as they could make money, they would use each other and be friendly. And you know, they, you know, in the movie, the animus between the two is greatly exaggerated.
Right. Now, do we know? So Cohen was probably sponsored by New York mobsters, and Dragna was also New York, or was that a Chicago?
No,
where was
New
his
York,
back?
Lucchese.
Do you know, John?
New York, Lucchese crime family.
For Dragna?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So this was just an extension of struggles between the five families in New York playing out here in LA, right?
Yeah. And you know, I mean, all over New Orleans, you know, but it was considered open. If you could come out here and start an illicit business, and you weren't stepping on anybody else's toes, it was considered fine. And that's why the Gangster Squad was so effective, because they would see these guys that, you know, they knew their own mobsters. They knew the Dragnas, the Lacatas, Mickey Cohen and his men. They knew them, and when these new guys would come in, you know, they probably prevented a lot gang wars like they had in Chicago,
Right.
just by being out here and sending these guys back to where they came from.
Yeah, it's not like they gave license to the Cohens and Dragnas. They suppressed them, and then they got rid of the ones that were trying to grow roots in the area, right? Build roots in the area. So, and this is also a scene where they talk about the Burbank PD being as corrupt as it was. And I mean, I didn't know that about Burbank, but they do have these small venues, these small police departments that could be corrupt. And Burbank is centrally located. I guess it would be ideal, right? Very close to LA, central,
right by the studios.
Right by the studios. And the studios were, to some degree, I mean, what the last mafiosa, Jimmy the Weasel Fradiani, I mean, they did talk about these LA mobsters, which were not as powerful as back east, but they did have some inroads into the movie industry. They did attempt to take over the unions, to control the movie industry. Those things did happen and did exist. Was your dad and the LAPD's organized crime, they were focused on deconstructing those kinds of efforts, right?
Well, yeah, and like Fradiano, my dad hated Fradiano, just hated him. He killed. There was a shooting, two mobsters, Tony Brancato. They called them the two Tonys, and Tony somebody else, and they were robbing bust out crap games, and they told them to stop it, and they didn't stop it. So Jimmy the Weasel Fradiano has a meeting with him. He says, you know, I'll get in the back seat, and then he shot both of them in the back of the head and killed them. and they knew he did it. So my dad and his partner Jumbo Kennard picked him up, and they took him to I think the Hollywood station. Now, Jimmy had tuberculosis, and his lungs had collapsed, and they had ping pong balls in there to keep his lungs open. And so they knew he couldn't breathe real well. So they go, well, we're going to interrogate you down in the basement. They take him down in the basement. They go, oh, this interrogation room is used, so let's go to the third floor. They kept running him up and down. I can hardly breathe, you know. They said, well, you big pussy, you can kill people, but you can't, you know, you don't want to talk about it. He hated it. And then Fradiano got arrested and turned evidence against the mob in New York and everything, and wrote his book.
A lot of people went down behind his testimony, but the interesting part is I think I read his book years ago, and it was talking about how they were making inroads in the movie industry, and they did have some inroads, and
yeah, they did.
And that would have been a big focus of LAPD, and I'm sure the sheriff's spy unit, because we had an intelligence unit that focused on that kind of stuff. And, you know, we do have a comment. Yeah, Ray Donovan covers the stuff that occurs now. I like the Ray Donovan series. It's very interesting.
Very well done.
Yeah, very well done. I like the character in that. A great show. Thanks for the comment. But yeah, so these guys are looking for any kind of, because I think in New York they're big in textiles, they're big in construction, and they're big in the port. So a lot of different areas where they took over, and this is what they were trying to do in LA. And I'm sure from the very beginning of their of the mobs or the organized crime in Los Angeles, the efforts to do that.
Yeah. But, you know, you were talking about just Burbank, but there was corruption on LAPD, and I'm sure in the sheriffs. In fact, Con told me that an LAPD lieutenant and an LA County Sheriff sergeant or lieutenant were frequenting this one tailor shop where they were making book. So, I mean, it was around. And in fact, LAPD had the big scandal with Brenda Allen, the madam in LA, the big madam in LA, and her bagman was a sergeant in administrative vice on LAPD. So it was, you know, and I'm sure in the 30s, both of them were as crooked as you could be. And these policing organizations go crooked usually in two places. It was one place back then. It was Vice, because Vice and Narcotics was just considered one unit way back there. But, you know, a lot of cops, like a lot of people, figure narcotics and vice and prostitution are victimless crimes. Yeah. And
come here.
They don't know the victims, you know.
Yeah, but there's a different attitude today, on particularly when it comes to prosecution. There, it's and I kind of agree with the change in attitude that it really is trafficking of women and kids, right, including boys, right, and young men. So it's good to see that. Let's do the wiretaps, and let's talk a little bit about that. Although I know we got a little into that, and they show that they're beginning to use wiretaps, and it was a common tool for them to use to get ahead of these guys, right, Buzz?
Oh yeah, they had one of my dad's friends who was on intelligence for about Steele was in his unit in the Pacific in the Rangers, and they had him put spikes on so they could climb telephone poles and put the wires up there. And got in Mickey Cohen's place in Brentwood, I think. Around the corner from him was a retired British Army officer, and he let them use his garage to listen in on the bugs they had at Mickey Cohen. Mickey Cohen bought a TV, you know, the best TV he could get from some department store at the time, and there, and Con Keeler got it, put a bug in it before it arrived at his house. Well, they have his phones tapped, and he calls this department store and says, I can't get channel 2. The other channels are good, but this channel, I get these wiggly lines, so they intercepted that call. So Khan goes there, picks up their van, puts on his repairman uniform, and goes in there and moves the bug further away from the channel changer or whatever. And it was working fine. And Cohen says, "Hey, I'll pay you $50 a week. Just come back every week." So every week, Khan would go back and change the batteries in the bug, and get paid $50 for fixing Cohen's TV.
Did they ever get onto the fact that they were being bugged? I
No.
mean, because in the movie they show it, he figures it out. But did these guys ever figure out that LAPD was bugging them?
Oh yeah. In fact, there was a private eye who they hired, not intelligence. I think the Vice Squad hired this guy to bug. Was it Cohen or one of the mobsters? I don't know which one. And he had all the tapes of that and wound up, selling them to somebody for a lot of money. So yeah, they had they bugged them a lot, and they kind of knew sometimes, but they tried to keep it, if they knew something was going to happen, they wouldn't necessarily bug them at the time it happened, but get them later, and so they wouldn't get a connection to where they were getting their information. And they had a lot of informants too.
So, and you talked about, when you talked about bugging, that Cohen's they tried to kill Cohen by bombing his house. Is that you want to tell that story? Or do you know anything about that other than it happened?
Well, the part I heard was that the intelligence, two of the intelligence guys, or I don't know if it was the Gangster Squad back then, they're waiting for Cohen, for the lights to go out in Cohen's house so they can get in the crawl space and try and fix their bug. They figured maybe a wire got kicked loose or whatever, or the batteries went dead, but they're waiting, and then the house blows up. And it was one of the other, I think it might have been the Dragness who tried to do that. So,
one of the other things that comes out of this scene is they try to intercept a drug delivery, which is a la prohibition, right? I mean, these gangsters were stealing liquor from each other as well, sure. And this is just an extension of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that is also to kind of sow continuing distrust between Dragna and Cohen, which is really what the Gangster Squad was doing at that time. And I don't know how robust it was, but what about narco? So was there did the intelligence guys get into the narco game? Did they bust some? Did they make busts on drugs based upon what these gangsters were doing at the time?
Well, when the Gangster Squad when it was called the Gangster Squad, there was narcotics, but the mob wasn't really in charge of that then. I think it was like the pre-Mexican mafia. It was all coming up from Mexico. So they weren't involved in it. Later they sure were. But most of them, their big money was gambling. They had poker games, they had bust out craft games, they had bookmaking was the big thing. In fact, talking about bugs and Fradiano had a house in Westchester by Loyola University, and that bugged. And they intercept a call. He calls a plumber that their master bedroom tub is leaking, or the faucet is leaking. So Khan puts on his plumber's outfit and goes there. His wife, Fradiano's wife, was a gal named Jewel. And if you read his book, The Last Mafioso, he talks about how one of these mobsters, as soon as, when he got sent to prison, one of his mobsters tried to rape his wife, and, which is, was true from Fradiano's point of view, but Jewel was a wild woman. And as soon as he left, she called this guy to come over. And when Con went, she meets him at the door and says, "Yeah, it's back here," and shows him the back bedroom, and she tries to put the make on Con. And Con says, "Well, your husband's out there. They had a pool. He's out there by the pool." She goes, "He's making book. He never comes in when he's making book, And he goes, "Nah, I'm not going to do that," and fixed their tub for him and then left. But
so the show here where Emma Stone, who's related to Mickey, and has a relationship with the cops, that's not really too far fetched, then, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's yeah. Some of these women that they were involved with, they knew what they wanted and they went after it. Have you heard of the Cahan decision?
No.
About bugging.
Well, I think we lost you, Buzz, again.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Okay. The Cahan was an Irish bookie in L.A. and Vice was working him, and they wanted to bug his house. He had a rental house that he would walk to from his home, and in the bedroom there, he had an office set up, and he was making book there. The Vice guys came to intelligence, "Can you plan a bug in there?" And they go, "Okay, we will, but don't use anything you hear there. Don't use anything to prosecute him. Just get the intelligence." Well, the Vice tried to use that in court, and that's where the Cahan decision came out, that you needed a search warrant in order to bug it. And you read the decision, which just shows you these judges will, how they bend facts so they can get the decision they want. They say in there, they violated the sanctity of the bedroom by putting this bug in the bedroom. Well, it was an office,
Yeah.
But yeah, my dad planted that bug, but he was pissed at the Vice cop for using that evidence to prosecute Cahan.
Well, because they knew that was a foregone conclusion once it went to court, right? So your dad was a little ahead of that. And we need to back up, John, just a little bit. I wanted to ask you a question, and this was early in the movie, and we didn't get into it. We got to talk about it. And girl gets off a bus, gets hit up by the mobster here.
Yeah.
And he goes to take her back to break her in, I guess, and they're going to rape her and turn her out as a prostitute.
Yep.
Still happens today.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's a legitimate scene, and it's still happening today around the country, not just in LA, but LA is a prime target because people are coming off the bus every day and the train to make it in the business. It was happening when we were working, right?
Oh yeah, all the time. And if you see them, you just snatch them. But yeah, these starlets, people want, even males.
Yeah.
Young kids that are running away from home, they're going to make it big in Hollywood. Then they come out and they get turned out. It's disgusting.
Yeah, one of the things that really bothered me in the state is they got rid of loitering with intent to commit prostitution, which was, it really is an effort to take the prostitute and get them out of the environment. You have to break that control that these pimps have with these prostitutes. And they just make it a lot harder. And I think there is an attitude on the left, it's my opinion, that they're okay with these sex crimes. And I'm not. I see it as it's clearly the woman was going to get exploited, right? Yeah. That happens all the time. And so we have to have some laws that allow law enforcement to protect them, even if it doesn't look like it's the best strategy. Sometimes that's the only strategy. And yet a lot of these utopian, these people who believe in these, these leftists think, or they think, well, sex is just it. They don't,
victimless crime.
Well, they not only that, they think it's legitimate work, and in this situation, their goal was to break her in, turn her into a prostitute.
Yeah,
there's no way in hell that's legitimate work when it's overseen by somebody. In my mind, I mean, I just don't see it as legitimate, and I don't think it's good for our society.
Oh, you're right.
But that still goes on today. I guess that's why it's the oldest profession.
Absolutely.
But the coercion is the important piece of it. And Buzz, here's the other thing. There were two. You talked about gambling being the number one, but the ladies, prostitution,
No, that was big too. Not as big as
that was
gambling.
big too, right? Yeah, back
yeah.
then and still today. Well, not with gangsters, but it is still today, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
sure it is. I mean,
So
you know, some things never change here. The urge to gamble and the urge for sex.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why people.
One of the themes in all of these movies, Buzz, and so I got to ask you, was this a attitude amongst the gangster squads? Whether we saw L.A. Confidential with Buzz beating up the people who were tough on women, we saw it in the Black Dahlia. The characters there, the coppers, they didn't like the guys that beat up the women. We saw it with, what was the other show we did where it was Mulholland Falls, same thing.
Mulholland Falls.
You know, if they were rough with the ladies, even if they were working laters, the gangster squad just did not like that.
Yeah.
Would you say that was a common attitude with the gangster squad?
With some of them, Jumbo Kennard particularly, he didn't care if the gal was a hooker from birth. You know, if somebody beat on her, he just didn't like that.
Perfect time, John. So if somebody beat on her,
no, and he the Mulholland Falls scenes, that was Jumbo Kennard throwing or pulling his gun out, and the him who'd beat up this gal said, "You better start running, or I'm going to start shooting." The guy ran down, fell halfway down Mulholland. So yeah, no, and I mean, like everybody else. I mean, guys, she's just a whore. Well, yeah. But a lot of them, you didn't beat women.
No, and that's and I just see it as a common theme in all these movies where so maybe Jumbo Kennard had an outsized influence on the attitude towards the gangster squad because it comes out in all the movies, right?
Yeah.
So that starts with people telling stories about what happened and who did what to who and why they did it, right?
Yeah.
And all right, let's get into mystery men. And so these guys are getting hit. Their drug shipments being stolen, and part of the goal, if you're doing insurgencies, is to get people to the where they don't know, they don't understand who's hitting us, and to create dysfunction within an organization. And obviously they ultimately figure out it is cops, but that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to sow discord between these two factions, the Coens and the Dragnas, and to weaken them both as organizations and weaken their ability to do. And that's a strategy used both in New York, Chicago, and here, right?
Sure. Yeah. If you can get them arguing among themselves, fighting among themselves, you can. It's easier to control them.
Divide and conquer.
Right.
Right. We saw that, John. We saw that right with Whitey Bulger, right? The FBI is working with Whitey. Whitey's giving information on the Italians. The Italians are going down. So there's. They're using all the different, and FBI is using the Irish, or actually Whitey Bulger's gang was kind of a mix, but using the White Winter Hill gang to take down was it the Patrician or the New England mobsters up there. So these kinds of things where we're sowing discord between these different groups is a common strategy for law enforcement, whether it's local or federal, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So, and then the other big part of this is the consolidation of gambling. So gambling was their biggest, I don't know if it still is. I imagine gambling's still a big part of their enterprise. But trying to control the gambling on the West Coast by controlling the wire. John, John, can you explain that, or do you want to explain what that means?
Oh, the wire?
Yeah.
Well, basically they hook it up to where they delay putting it out to all their bettors, and because you didn't have TV back then, you didn't have on time horse racing and all that. You'd get this wire, and they already knew the outcome, and they would take their bookies. And now, of course, some people bet on the right horse, but 90% of the time they won. They
Yeah.
took the money from their gamblers, and the gamblers got in deep. But the Wire what supposedly in this movie, Cohen wanted to do the Wire for the entire state and then the entire West Coast, which would have been major league bucks,
Yeah.
not just for LA.
And there was a war over that wire.
Yep.
Over who controlled
There was. Okay.
Yeah.
Between Dragna and Cohen's folks?
I don't know if it was between them and it was the Jewish mobsters who were trying to get control of it. And it kind of started back east. And and they were trying to open the West Coast. And I don't really know. I didn't hear. I mean, I heard that there was a war, but I if I was told, I don't recall who exactly was involved. But I'm sure the Jewish mobsters were involved big time, and some of the guys that are like Rosenthal and from Vegas, of Vegas fame, some of those guys who knew numbers, who were mathematical geniuses, they were involved in it.
Well, you saw this. They talk about The Wire, the great movie, The Sting.
Yeah.
And they pull the scam on the rich guy, suggesting that they controlled The Wire and he was going to make a bet and guaranteed win. So they actually sucked him in, right? And his bet, they were just ripping him off. So, so this concept of The Wire was a big deal, probably. And this was this all horse racing? Buzz, it was all horse racing. So it would have been like Santa Anita and some of the races on the West Coast.
Oh, yeah. Hialeah in Florida, all of them.
Florida?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Because they could really delay it from the East Coast to the West Coast later on. And
right.
Not when this movie's era, but yeah, they could control it, and they could, and like John said, you could more than balance your book on that. I mean, bookmaking, isn't considered, it's what's the lowest grade felony there is.
Right.
And, and when I worked Vice in the late 80s, you didn't have, most of the bookmakers, you would like them personally. They were pretty nice guys. They didn't have really, the era of Louis the Leg Breaker was kind of over. And what they would do was, if you had a guy who owed you money and wasn't paying you, you'd let all your other bookie buddies know, hey, he owes me money, don't take any bets. Well, for a bettor, that's the worst punishment there is. So, they'd get their money together and get their money eventually. So, and
they pay their bill then, right? So,
yeah.
Well, one of the things that I think the gambling operations, they didn't. They in this place, it shows it was in the city of Burbank, so they have to have a protected place to do this stuff, right? So in this case, the gambling operation, they show it's in the city of Burbank. It's protected by the city of Burbank, and these guys are trying to undercut it, right? And then because it's to disrupt their. Well, if you're doing a classic insurgency operation, you want to disrupt their supplies, you want to disrupt their dope, you want to disrupt their operation, and that's what these guys are trying to do in the Gangster Squads. Was it as organized as that, or were these guys just flowing? The Gangster Squads just flowing to opportunities to disrupt individuals and groups, or was there this effort to show discord by law enforcement robustly as they show in the movie? In your opinion?
Well, they were pretty organized themselves, and they would do things to disrupt them. But they ought, God, I wish if I was a little book my dad had from the 50s, and it listed all the gangsters they knew at the time. They'd have their picture if they had a picture of them, list their car, and like it'd say this guy was 38 years old in 1951. So if the book was a couple of years old, you could tell it was, tell how old he was, and it lists his known associates. And they would hand these books out. They'd give some of them to selected patrol officers in certain areas and say, hey, get what you can on this guy, and if you see him doing this, and this guy's been involved in in liquor store robberies to get money so he can gamble at this underground casino, and so they had their plans, but a lot of it was hit and miss, just like anything else. They'd hear their snitch would tell them that this store that sold mink stoles and mink capes was going to get robbed or going to get burglarized. And in fact, my dad and his partner Bill Roberts got in two really serious accidents. One, they'd been on a stakeout for a long time, like 36 hours, and they're driving home. My dad's partner's driving home, and his partner, my dad's asleep in the passenger seat, and Bill Roberts falls asleep and hits a light pole, and my dad went through the windshield and was given the last rites like 3 times that night. But he pulled through, and then a couple of years later, they were staked out on a fur store, and they saw the guys. They didn't see him going in, but saw him leaving with all these furs, and they chased him in Long Beach, and at Our Lady of Refuge Church, as the bad guys go by him, my dad's driving, goes by, and this guy pulls out of the parking lot from the 6 o'clock mass, and he hit him, and my dad was in the hospital. He and Bill were in the hospital then for another few weeks. The major, but they were wearing seatbelts then, because after their first accident, LAPD tested all their seatbelts out on my dad and his partner.
Oh, okay. Well, I think one of the things that God, I lost my thought now. That's what happens when you get older, right? You kind of lose your place here. But one of the things I did want to talk about is the guy Jack Whalen, who's featured in this film. He actually is a real person, and he plays kind of friend of Ryan Gosling's character, right? And he seems to be friendly with. I don't know if he was a bookmaker or what he was, but he's friendly with the cops. But he's also part of Mickey Cohen's, or at least he's hired as an enforcer. And it's interesting that they picked these characters out and then they blended them into the story. Did your dad or his team have any interactions with Jack Whalen?
Oh yeah, he was an enforcer. He was probably a hitman, and he wound up getting killed
but not like in the movie.
Yeah, no, I think he was trying to strong arm somebody for Mickey Cohen or something, and the guy was armed and took care of Jack Whalen. So
Jack Whalen, yeah, it shows that Cohen in the picture. We'll get into it, but it's interesting. His dad was a career criminal, and here's the other thing I felt was interesting about his character, and actually a lot of these guys, is they actually fought in World War II. Some of these criminals.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and right, and because he was a bomber pilot in World War II. His dad sent him. His dad didn't want him to be a criminal, sent him to military school, and then he became a bomber pilot, so decorated bomber pilot, and and when he got out, he eventually got into a life of crime and became a enforcer, like you're talking about, and and it's interesting because a lot of these guys, and I know we've talked about this before, whether it's LA Confidential or some of these other movies, most of these guys, particularly the cops, are former soldiers.
Yeah.
These.
I mean, that was the time for it. It's right after World War II.
Yep.
Get on the police department, and they were.
And a lot of them were combat soldiers.
Yeah,
right?
Oh yeah.
They fought. They fought in Europe. They fought in the Pacific. They fought in Asia. I mean, a lot of these are tough guys who endured a lot for many years, and then they go into law enforcement, right? Yeah. So these are not shrinking violets. These are not, helicopter kids who had helicopter parents in the 70s and 80s, and then suddenly they're they're on the streets. These are guys who, they're not afraid to mix it up. They've seen friends die, and so these are tough guys, right? That's who your dad was. Did your dad fight in World War II?
Yeah, he was a ranger in the South Pacific and did rubber boat landings behind Japanese lines. And he had a grudging respect for even some of the mobsters who'd been soldiers. The Sika brother, there was three Sika brothers, Joe Sika and
Robert.
Yeah. And another one. And he had a respect for them. Joe Sika made book, and my dad arrested him once up off La Brea where all the oil wells are.
Yeah.
Guy comes into our office, says, "I have these oil wells there, and this guy's trying to strong arm his way into my business. What's his name? Joe Sika." So my dad says, "Okay." So my dad gets in the trunk of his car with a tape recorder. He's supposed to meet Sika up at these oil wells. Sika gets in the car and he has him on tape extorting money, extorting the business from this guy. So he arrests Joe Sika and they go to jail. Well, but he said Joe Sika, took his money. He said he had a son with special needs, and he took some of his money. He had like a mini ranch out in the San Fernando Valley. He got a pony for his son, and he said, he had a respect for him because he fought in the war, and he wasn't one of the real badasses. Well, he says years later, after he retired, he was at Red Tracton's restaurant. Originally, it was at La Brea, at La Cienega and Rodeo, but he moved it to the Valley, Encino at the time. But he and my mom go in there to have dinner, and a couple of drinks come over and go, Mr. Sika over there sent you a couple of drinks. So he says, okay. And when he gets up to leave, Joe Sika and his brothers are sitting there, and he goes over and goes in. He goes, Joe says, "Oh, I heard you retired." He said, "Yeah." He says, to my dad, "Well, what are you doing now?" He says, "Well, I have my own private investigation firm, private security." He says, "I do a lot of debugging because we planted a lot of bugs." And Joe Sika looks at him. He says, "You're telling me this?"
Well, it's interesting. So in the movie, I don't think I got this scene, but Jack Whalen does get killed. We can go to roll the movie, the setup, and they figure it's the cops and Mickey Cohen in the movie, which is, again, this is fictional history. This is Jack Whalen does get killed, but as you guys talked about, he gets killed working for Mickey Cohen. But in the retaliation thing, one of the guys gets killed. The bugger guy. What's his real life name there, Buzz?
Con Keeler.
Con Keeler. He gets allegedly killed in the movie, and that's not true, right?
Yeah,
And
right.
one guy chokes him out, which probably would not have happened with the real Con Keeler. Yeah. And Jack Whalen is defending Emma Stone for Ryan Gosling's character. And Mickey Cohen comes to get her because he's now setting these guys up. He figures out who they are, and here's and so they do the setup to kill them all, right? And but he wants Emma Stone because he realizes she's the leak, and he kills Jack Whalen in the movie, right? But that's not accurate.
No, it's not
as well. And so I wanted to get to is, was there ever a big strike back against the Gangster Squad? Because I didn't see that as realistic at all. Because I think that would have brought down hell on these guys, and they kind of knew that, right?
And they knew that, so they wouldn't have done anything. I do want to say one thing about in the movie when Con Keeler gets killed. It was in his garage, and I've been to Con's house, and he did have all his laboratory, electronics, and machine shop and everything in his garage. In his house, it was on Noble out in, I think it's called Mission Hills now. But that was, I saw that and I thought, well, that's probably where Con would have been. He would have been out with the rest of the guys by that time. He didn't just listen to stuff in his garage. He didn't have a listening post there. But No, they never did that. And in fact, my dad once was testifying in court, and the defense attorney says, well, where did you get this information? Well, my confidential informant called me at home. Well, what's your home number? Well, I'm not going to give it to you. And the prosecutor saying he doesn't have to give it to him. Well, the judge ordered him to give it to him. Give him the phone. My dad knows, well, if he gets the phone number, he can find out where I live. So he gives the phone number, and he and his partner took one of their office shotguns out and went to several places where the mobsters were. And they go, if we see any of you guys anywhere near my house, anywhere near my family, we're going to come get you. I mean, that's as close as anything I heard about them going after anybody. And they never did come after my dad or my family or me or anybody else. So
it was just probably intimidation, but they fought fire with fire, right? You fight, you challenge strength with strength, right, John?
Right.
Absolutely. Well, you got, like you said, these guys are from World War II.
Yeah.
They've been there, done that.
Yeah, they're not going to get intimidated, but
yep,
they could do some intimidation.
Exactly.
But they do show, the only thing, that weakness, and they do show it throughout the film with all of all of our police characters, is their family. That's their weakness, right? And that comes out in your story. I mean, they'll actually shoot up O'Mara's house, which actually didn't happen, but they do shoot it up. And so they kill one of them, and so there's and his family, and theoretically his family's in the house too. So they do in the movie they express that there's everything's fair game, but that's not really accurate about it. I don't want to say they had honor amongst the thieves, but it was realistic in that you didn't do that because you knew, like I said.
Yeah, all hell would break loose if they did it.
What's his name? I'm coming and hell's coming with me, right? What was that? That's that great line from Tombstone, right?
Yeah.
Tell them I'm coming and hell's coming with me, and they kind of knew that with these guys, and so they weren't gonna. Yeah. Who delivered that line, John? I can't remember now. Who was in the movie?
Russell.
Kurt Russell. That's right. Yeah.
Wider. Real man.
Yeah.
But so we get the big shootout scene. So roll right into it, Martine, when you get a chance. And this is I labeled this as arresting Mickey, and he's supposed to be in some hotel. If these guys, if they knew they were coming after him, right, they're not going to like hold up with 20 guys with guns, right? They're going to just get out of town, right? They're not going to, challenge. The cops are coming after them. They're not going to have a shootout with. First of all, they're not going to have like 20 submachine guns, right? Thompsons. Yeah, we just heard a story about you fighting over one, right? Yeah. So it was a prized commodity, right?
Yeah.
And they did use bombs, though. We saw, we heard about that with Mickey Cohen's house getting bombed. So bombs weren't off the table, but bombing the police probably was not accurate. But in this scene, we got all these guys with machine guns shooting it out, and there's no historical context this whatsoever in LA.
No,
right, Buzz? I mean, this is fun to watch.
Yeah. Although
that's exactly
entertaining is all get up, but it wasn't. It was so far from the truth. They never did that, and the gangsters would never have intentionally shot a cop.
Exactly.
Right. So
you don't want that notoriety.
Yeah.
Why do that when you could just buy the judge, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
And they did own more than a few.
Yeah. It's just buy the judge, buy a few cops to, deal with the evidence, and maybe buy off some of the jury, which was another strategy certainly used in New York, and no doubt used in LA. One of the things I did notice on the scene, we got a lot of these bullets flying around in this shootout at the hotel, but none of the stained glass is getting shot out.
Yeah.
So, because they're shooting towards the stained glass, and none of it's getting shot out. Because you're on the steps, right? And so you see behind the gangsters is all this stained glass, and none of it is getting shot out, right?
Yeah.
And then here's the other one. You got this guy with looks like a BAR, right? Which is kind of I forget what BAR is.
Automatic rifle.
Browning automatic rifle. So that's it, and he's shooting down, and our guy Kennard, right? The one shot, boom, hits him with his sixth shot, and which is that was kind of a fun part of the movie, right? It was entertaining, and I thought they were, because you're right, Buzz. It was more their physical attributes than their ability to shoot that was the issue in dealing with the gangsters, and they played up the whole shooting part of it. Probably a lot more. Hey, the guy that talked his way out versus the guy who can shoot his way out was worth his weight in gold, right? The guy that can talk a person in prison, and but this was a very entertaining scene. They clearly were outgunned. He's allegedly got a search warrant. But that's the other thing. He goes and gets the judge to sign a search warrant. Based on everything you're telling me, well, that's just a mere formality, right? But
that was for planning listening devices. But I imagine it wasn't that different for anything, back then.
Yeah.
When we were on, geez, you had to get a search warrant to get a guy's handkerchief who sneezed in public.
Well, and then it's got to be reviewed by your supervisor. Now the lieutenant's got to look at it for risk assessment and accuracy, and of course the judge has to. The DA, the DA in Beverly Hills wanted to see those too. It wasn't like if you were doing local cases, they wanted to see it if they got a chance. It was only if it was an emergency. Well, you still had to call the DA's command post to get a telephonic search warrant. So they were definitely involved every step of the way. But anyways, the shootout was very entertaining, and
that's all.
It's a good climax. But I think the street fight at the end, between Omer and Mickey Cohen, clearly fictional, and you can roll right into that, Martine, when it starts. But so they chase him. He crashes into a fountain, and he actually ends up in a street fight with Mickey Cohen, right? And so it's not unbelievable that Mickey Cohen wouldn't be a good scrapper if he trained as a boxer for several years, right? And it kind of shows in the scene that he's getting the better of Omer. But Omer and all of the other Gangster Squad, these are tough guys, right? And I was looking at Josh Brolin. He's only 5'10". In comparison to the Gangster Squads, he would have been a small guy, right?
Yeah. And plus, Mickey Cohen was only 5'5" or 5'6". Even a 5'10" guy. But I don't know how tall Jack was, but they were all over 6 feet.
Yeah.
So, he would have had arm length on him and
weight, arm length, and of course they would have had friends. I don't think anybody would have stood and just watched this happen. They'd have been taken. Go ahead, John.
Just in closing on this, the Jack Whalen thing where he shot in the pool and he kills him. Like Buzz said, he was shot at Club Figaro in the presence of Mickey Cohen, probably doing a muscle job, like Buzz said, and he got shot right between the eyes, and he died there. But then at the end, it says he's arrested for Whalen's murder. No. Cohen went to jail for tax evasion. Same thing Al Capone went for.
Yep.
And then the narrative says that friends of Jack Whalen's took care of business in the prison. No. Mickey Cohen went in there, thought he was the King Farouk, to start pushing people around in prison. And these guys were hardened-ass criminals.
Yeah.
And they beat the hell out of him. They beat him to death with pipes.
Yeah.
Well, he got out, and he kind of was kind of a minor celebrity, right? That's what I read up on. I mean, he interacted with people. He was kind of a minor celebrity. I forget who the attorney general that he hung out with a little bit, but he was. I don't want to say he went straight, but he definitely didn't have the stature after he got out of prison.
No.
Well, the last time he got out, he was pretty much retired.
He was retired, right? And he ended up dying of, I think he died of cancer, right? And he was supportive of Israel because he's Jewish. There's a lot of things about him that came out, but he was kind of a minor celebrity and would go give speeches and presentations about his life. And there was a time when the media played up some of these guys, right? And certainly Hollywood did a lot of that too. So Hey, this was a great show, you guys. Buzz, I really appreciate you coming back and giving us the straight scoop on the Gangster Squad. And I think we got more into the actual history of the Gangster Squad on this show than we have with other shows. And I'll have to, a couple months, I'll look for another movie. Is there another movie that you think portrays the Gangster Squad in which we can profile them that you can think of?
No, none I can think of. I think the ones we've talked about, I've been on before, I think show different aspects of it. I did see a good movie. It wasn't about the Gangster Squad, but I saw it last night. The Kill the Irishman.
Oh yeah.
About the Cleveland mob. I mean, that was a pretty interesting movie.
Yeah.
No, I can't think of any. But if I do, I'll let you know.
Let you know, because we'll do it. It's always good history talking about the different characters and what LA was like back in the day before we kicked the. Well, I don't want to say we kicked the gangsters out, but they're almost a shadow of once they used to be here in LA. Just they don't have that kind of strength anymore. And in fact, I think our organized crime division, they just switched to Mexican mafia.
Well,
motorcycle gangs, things like that, because the mafia just isn't that strong out here, and it's weakened around the country as well, right?
No, well, yeah, and Fradiano, and who was the other guy who was with him?
That flip,
were hitmen, and I mean they pretty much decimated, had them cut off the head of the mobsters. There's others that'll come up, but there's others, mafias, the Russian mafia.
Yep. All right, John, thank you for also coming on again.
Hey,
Great
guys.
show. Good discussion. Buzz, thank you for coming on. You watched the Morning Coffee with the Chief, where we reviewed the Gangster Squad with the Gangster Squad historian Buz Williams. He lived it with his grandpa and his dad, and movie aficionado retired Lieutenant John Baylis. Thank you guys for coming on, and I hope you guys had a good time like I did. Catch us next week on Morning Coffee with the Chief. Martine, you can take it away.